This forecast is brought to you by me. If you haven't done so yet already, I definitely suggest getting a reading from me. Not only is it a lot of information packed into a relatively short amount of time, but it's pretty good value as well. You can see, if you check out my website, you can purchase readings directly with this menu here. Right now, I'm offering birth chart readings, which is an hour of a pre-recorded video of me just talking about, your chart, and it's an hour long, so I can pack in a lot of information to that hour. And right now I'm only charging $55 in US currency. So if you're interested, check that out. You can also see what other types of readings I offer. There's information about all the different types of readings that I offer. You can also check out testimonials here too if that's what you are interested. Okay, but thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, July 29th through Sunday, August 4th, 2024. This week, quick announcement. So we did just pass 4,000 subscribers. So I feel like I wish I could I guess I could do some kind of special video. If you have any ideas, let me know. But nothing really came to mind. So, I thought I would just at least give it a quick shout out. But anyway, so let's get into the astrology for the week. This week is interesting because on the one hand, there's not a lot of aspects for the week. However, there are a couple major things happening. So one is Mercury. We got to talk about Mercury here. I apologize. I haven't mentioned that Mercury has actually been in pre-shadow since July 17th. That's where it reached 21 degrees Leo. And this is actually kind of an opportunity to mention this other website that I use. If you haven't used this yet, if you're interested, I'll copy the URL, the link, and I'll put it in the description. Maybe I'll comment it as well. I don't know. But yeah, this is just really handy. It gives you dates. I mean, you can of course listen to my forecast as well, and I will share you the dates for these, pivotal moments with Mercury retrograde and direct and all that. But yeah, I like this website. It just kind of gives you, I don't know, a rundown of Mercury retrograde. So this is going to be the second Mercury retrograde of this year. You'll probably remember we had a pretty crazy one back in, I believe, April. It was in Aries. It was kind of it was coinciding with the eclipse season back last spring. So now Mercury technically reached its pre-shadow at 21 degrees Leo on July 17th. And Mercury stations retrograde on August 5th. You can see here. So technically that's just one day past the scope of this forecast. However, it does have huge implications for this week because I always explain, Mercury turning retrograde or turning direct or any planet turning retrograde or direct, it doesn't just happen in a day. I mean, yes, technically we can look at these dates and see the exact, moments that these things occur. But these things happen gradually though. So in the moments, in the days, and even maybe technically weeks leading up to Mercury stationing retrograde, before Mercury stations retrograde, it'll slow down, and then it'll stop, and then that's where, as it gradually that's where it stations retrograde technically, and then it will gradually pick up speed, moving in the opposite direction from our point of view, right? So basically, what that means for this week is that Mercury is slowing down and it's coming to a standstill. By the end of the week, it's not really going to be moving at all. And so, although technically Mercury doesn't station retrograde this week, we're going to be feeling the impacts of it this week already. Okay. And that's just the truth of it. So things, pertaining to information and technology and kind of just the movement of like energy. I don't know. I feel like Mercury has to do with like the rhythm of everything, the busyness, the errands, the tasks and the errands, all these connections, not just informationally, but also, in other ways as well. All of these things will kind of slow down as we get to the end of the week. So you may kind of encounter some of that typical Mercury retrograde dysfunction, even as early as the end of the week, for sure. I often say I think the most dysfunctional part of Mercury retrograde is the beginning of it. I would even say maybe a couple days before, because as Mercury stations, it becomes stationary. It's not really moving for really the better part of a week. So when any planet is stationary, it becomes intensified. Okay. And also you have to take into account we're dealing with the change, the apparent change of motion, the change of direction of that planet. So the change of direction of everything that planet symbolizes is also like changing. You know what I mean? Like all those things I just listed off, the information, the movement of everything, all of that is changing. The very nature of how we deal with those things is going to change. The experience of it will change direction, not just on August 5th, but even as soon as the end of this week, if that makes sense. So that's just something to look out to. And for you astrology nerds out there, like I know I would want some dates. I'm going to give you some dates that I think might be interesting. So the one I mentioned a couple times, Mercury enters pre-shadow July 17th. Before I give you these other dates, let me just explain what that means real quick. I'll give you the boiled down version. So when Mercury enters pre-shadow, it's traveling very quickly. When it first enters pre-shadow, Mercury is way ahead of the sun. You can see even here, as we start out the week on Monday, this is the chart for Monday, July 29th, 2024 at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can see here, sun is barely in Leo. It's at 7 degrees Leo. Mercury is already at 2 degrees Virgo. So it's almost a whole sign ahead of the sun. I actually looked at it, and Mercury can travel as far as about, I think it was 26 or 27 degrees ahead of the sun. So almost a whole sign. So in other words, when Mercury first enters that pre-shadow, like it just did kind of recently, I guess technically it was before this chart, but you get what I'm saying. When Mercury enters pre-shadow, it's way ahead of the sun. It's traveling very quickly. So that means that everything is happening so quickly that we can't really digest it in time. There's a lot going on right now that we're not fully integrating, and that's okay. In some ways, this chart looks pretty nice. I talked about last week how Sun is in domicile in Leo, Mercury's exalted and in domicile in Virgo. We have some of these interplanetary placements that are pretty at home, pretty cozy. Even the moon will be transiting from Taurus through Leo this week. And moon is pretty comfortable in all of these signs, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo. So on one level, like the planets are pretty comfortable. They're cozy. Things are happening as we would expect them to be. But at the same time, taking into account what Mercury is doing, that it gives you a different spin on things. It really shows that there's so much happening informationally, technologically, so much happening just in our lives in general that we're not fully integrating, we're not understanding. And that's normal for this part of the Mercury cycle. I do think it would be even more intense for this particular one because with Mercury exalted and preparing to go retrograde, that's a particularly intense one. I think Mercury retrograde in Virgo is particularly dysfunctional and intense. So again, we're not there quite yet, but things are already, traveling so quickly. Like, look at your own life and even what's happened up to this point where you're listening to this forecast. Like, can you really say that you've been fully integrating everything? Probably not. And I'm not criticizing you. Again, like, this is natural. It's okay. I really wouldn't even, we have to do what we can. We have to do our best to understand everything and adapt to things as they come. But beyond that, I wouldn't worry about it. It's not a stressor. This is a natural process, okay? So things are going to be very, happening very quickly. There's a lot going on. But Mercury will turn retrograde or station retrograde on August 5th once it reaches 4 degrees Virgo. And that's kind of what I was saying. We start out the week with Mercury at 2 degrees Virgo. We end the week with Mercury at 4 degrees Virgo. So it's very unusual. Well, depending on how you look at it, it's unusual for Mercury to travel only 2 degrees in a whole week. It really only does that right before or right after Mercury stationing direct or stationing retrograde. That's my point. It's basically stationary this week. So so things are traveling very quickly, but once Mercury stations retrograde next week, yes, that will be very dysfunctional because in modern Western society, it's very linear. we're very straightforward. We want to go from A to B to C to D. We want to do everything the same way. Everything is like a factory line, right? And that just doesn't work with these astrological cycles, particularly Mercury retrograde. So on the one hand, yes, that is very dysfunctional. But on the other hand, Mercury retrograde, I know this is going to sound kind of silly or kind of woo-woo, but Mercury retrograde can be viewed as a blessing because we have such an intense like rush of information and things going on in the weeks leading up to Mercury stationing retrograde. So once Mercury does station retrograde, as long as we have some kind of way of integrating, we can actually use that Mercury retrograde period to gain clarity on the events that have just transpired. I really hope that makes sense for you. I understand that we have our schedules. Many of us are busy. We have to work. We have to do this. We have to do that. Find some kind of time, like take a break, like stop and smell the roses, like drink some water or your beverage of choice. I don't know, is there anywhere you can enjoy nature? Like these things are really great for Mercury retrograde periods because these are great times for building that intuition and just digesting everything. And there's there's during Mercury retrograde periods there's usually less activity physically. Mercury's retrograde is supporting less activity physically. I think that's a good way of putting it. So if we want to be more physically active, that's where it gets dysfunctional. That's where you see dysfunctions with, traveling and technology and things like that. So ideally during Mercury retrograde, we'll have less physical activity, but there's more activity going on ethereally, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, etc. Like our dreams are more vivid. It's more of a time of inspiration and intuition and things of that nature. So back to these dates. I know I'm a little rambly today, but Mercury will be retrograde from August 5th, where it will be at 4 degrees Virgo, all the way to August 28th, where, once it'll go backward and it'll reach 21 degrees Leo, and that's where it'll station direct on August 28th. So really, as we're going into August, we're going to have most of August with Mercury retrograde. So just kind of like, I don't know, keep that in mind, in the back of your mind. And then the last date for my astrology nerds that want to know, after Mercury turns direct on August 28th at 21 degrees Leo, Mercury will finally leave the post shadow on September 11th at 4 degrees Virgo. I know that date sounds a little ominous. It really doesn't have any implications as far as the Mercury retrograde cycle. In my opinion, it's really just a coincidence. I don't think it really means anything. But yeah, and I won't talk about the post shadow. I think I just dumped a lot of information on you already, so we'll talk about that later on. I mean, that happens over like a month and a half from now, really. So but yeah, so this week, yes, we are preparing for Mercury retrograde. What's interesting about this week is that we don't have a whole lot of aspects. The reason why, though, is this always happens whenever Mercury stations direct or retrograde. Because Mercury is slowing down and it's kind of stopping, it basically means that we have less aspects. Mercury is usually the fastest traveling planet, and so Mercury makes the most aspects with all the other planets. That's why Mercury is the messenger god. So we always have this weird quiet time, especially before and after a stationary, a Mercury station like this, where there's just not a lot of aspects. So I don't have much to talk about for the whole week other than Sunday, August 4th. So this is a day where I do have some stuff to talk about here. So Sunday, August 4th, we have a new moon. Also, keep in mind, this is the day before Mercury technically stations retrograde. I mentioned that earlier, but Mercury does station retrograde on August 5th, Monday. So just one day before that, or in other words, right when Mercury's, mid pretty much a complete stop, so to speak, and it's about to turn backward, right as that process is happening, we have a new moon in Leo. So I think this new moon looks particularly dysfunctional to me. Not just dysfunctional, though. It's not just bad. It could be a good thing. But we have this new moon in Leo at 12 degrees. It happens in the morning Eastern Standard Time. And it doesn't make a whole lot of aspects that I can see other than a sextile with Jupiter and Mars in Gemini. Mars and Jupiter are preparing to conjoin. They haven't yet, I believe, but they are kind of preparing to. They're pretty close to each other in Gemini. So this like sextile between the Sun and Moon in Leo with Mars and Jupiter in Gemini, it's not exact, but it's pretty dang close. So yeah, we're combining these energies of the Leo new moon, which is, it's peak Leo energy. It's fun, it's confident, it's rowdy, it's maybe a little egocentric. That's making this really harmonious aspect with Mars and Jupiter in Gemini, which is a little funky. Mars and Jupiter combined together is also an energy of supreme like confidence and, let's go out and conquer everything. It's very expansive. But being in Gemini, this is a little weird. It's more intellectual in nature. I think Mars and Jupiter are both more comfortable in like fire signs or certain water signs. But they're a little out of place in Gemini. So they're supporting this expansion intellectually with information and ideas. And they're making this, again, this harmonious aspect with the new moon. So yeah, there's some kind of new beginning with Leo themes, Leo archetypes. There's some kind of new beginning with our pride, our self-expression, our confidence, our identity. And again, it's very timely that this is coinciding with, pretty much Mercury being completely stationary. So something is very much dramatically changing directions on Sunday, August 4th. I would even kind of apply that to like give or take a couple days. So, really all weekend going into Monday and Tuesday of the next week. There's something pivoting. There's something changing. If you want more information on what that will look like for you personally, look to where 12 degrees Leo falls in your chart, as well as, 4 degrees Virgo. Both of those points represent shifts, Mercury stationing retrograde at 4 degrees Virgo, where it already is on Sunday. And then the Leo new moon happening at 12 degrees Leo as well. Both are representing shifts. I usually say that new moons are the most quiet and most peaceful part of the lunar cycles, but there are exceptions though. And this one in particular for one, it's in Leo. It's a fire sign. It's more boisterous. It's more active. You can see here too, during the new moon, we have Sun, Moon, and Venus all in Leo at the same time. So that is kind of a little burst of fire energy, of Leo energy. So yeah, typically new moons are a little more peaceful, but this one may be a little bit more volatile, a little bit more active, especially with the sextiles to Jupiter and Mars, both of which are like promoting more activity as well, maybe more frenetic or scattered energy because they are in Gemini. So yeah, it's kind of a lot to kind of take in. There is one other thing happening on Sunday, so at least like with aspects with the astrology, that would be Venus entering Virgo. And this is particularly interesting in my opinion because I've mentioned in previous forecasts with Neptune and Pluto so close to the sign cusps, anytime a planet enters a sign, right before or after they enter that sign, they aspect Pluto and Neptune. I'm not going to talk about Neptune actually, now I think about it. Okay, so yeah, I'm just noticing there's a yod. Yeah. So I don't know if I haven't talked about yods in a long time, and forgive me, I haven't been prepared. I didn't realize this would happen before. But a yod is basically two quincunxes and a sextile. So I'll use my pointer to try to illustrate this because I'm not sure. I know a lot of you are very experienced with astrology and already know what a yod is, but maybe this is a new concept for some of you as well. But basically, we've got Venus, within the same day on Sunday. Venus will, start out the day at the last degree of Leo, and Venus will end the day at the first degree of Virgo. So really, during the day, Venus will be technically making two aspects, but these two aspects become part of a larger aspect. Pluto and Neptune have been making this kind of sextile. Technically, I was actually just looking at this because I was looking at I was doing my calendar for August, and this sextile between Pluto and Neptune will not become exact, so it's an imperfect sextile is one way of putting it. But it's pretty dang close. It's technically an out of sign sextile. I know I'm throwing a lot of jargon at you, but with Neptune at the very last degree of Pisces and Pluto at the very first degree of Aquarius, they're basically 60 degrees apart almost. They're 2 signs apart, so that would be a sextile. That would be a harmonious aspect. The reason why I'm talking about this now, though, is because with Venus entering this Leo Virgo cusp, so while Pluto and Neptune are basically sextiling, Venus makes simultaneously first quincunxes Neptune, and then immediately after that quincunxes Pluto. So basically you have this like triple aspect where there are 2 quincunxes and 1 sextile. So you have the dysfunction and the weirdness of these 2 quincunxes, but then also a little bit of harmony with the sextile. Okay. And it basically makes, it's called the finger of God because it forms kind of a finger, and it's kind of, giving you the finger. It's a weird energy. Yods are actually kind of my favorite aspect because there's this bittersweet nature to it. There is some kind of harmony, but at the same time with quincunxes are arguably the most difficult aspect. They're not the most major aspect. They're not as loud as squares or oppositions. That's why I don't usually cover them in these forecasts. But I would argue a quincunx conjures up an issue or a problem that is basically unsolvable, because how do you combine, the energies are so different, they can't really be combined. They're like oil and water. How do you mix Venus in Leo with Neptune in Pisces? They're such different energies. Leo and Pisces have basically nothing in common. They have they have less in common than any other like pairing of signs, basically. Same with Pluto entering Virgo and Venus entering Virgo. Venus and Virgo, how do you reconcile that difference that it makes with Pluto in Aquarius? They're such dramatically different energies. They're more different than they would be if it was an opposition that we were talking about. So basically there's this weird, unsolvable problem or situation, but there's this bittersweet nature to it as well. And honestly, usually with quincunxes, maybe on some level we need to adapt, but usually it's unsolvable. Usually we have to kind of just wait it out, or maybe just appreciate the dysfunction of the universe, of God. Nature is dysfunctional. That's part of the functionality of it. There is this kind of beauty to the way that everything works, but at the same time, I think sometimes we need to find these, that's why I love Yods, because you have to just kind of stop and marvel at how wonderful and how beautiful the world is, even not even just despite its dysfunctions, but maybe even because of those dysfunctions. So anyway, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you will by Sunday, because that's when we'll experience this weird situation. Specifically, it's pointed at Venus, so specifically having to do with love, beauty, attraction, values. What else? What do you value? What is valued? What do you what makes your life pleasurable and desirable? All of these things may have some kind of dysfunction, some kind of need, and it's a need for change, but at the same time there's something blocking that change. There's some kind of choice that needs to be made, but you just can't make up your mind. There's some kind of, it's just a weird situation. It's hard for me to explain. But I've observed Yods, and if you observe this yourself and see how it affects you throughout this weekend, you'll know what I mean. You'll know what I'm talking about. But I do think this is extra dysfunctional because this happens while Venus is entering Virgo, where Venus happens to be in fall. So we're entering a time of Venus being, I almost said disabled, being debilitated, basically disabled in Virgo. So the pleasure, the desire are a little bit awkward. They're harder to find, harder to reach with Venus entering Virgo. And yeah, this is extra dysfunctional as well because Mercury's in Virgo, where it's very at home. He's very exalted there, but he's stationing retrograde. So it's even that intellectual energy is going to be dysfunctional as well. So I hope that doesn't sound too menacing or too ominous. But it's basically, yeah, it's a weird week. Really every week is a weird week in my opinion. But I hope this forecast was helpful or interesting to you. Again, if you're thinking about getting a reading, definitely consider it. It's a lot of fun, a lot of information, a lot of value, in my opinion. But yeah, thanks so much for hanging out with me, and have a great week.